All right, hello people. Welcome back. I am back. I have returned from my, kind of 3 weeks off. Um, Getting into that. The only reason I had 3 weeks off is a combination of things. For one, there wasn't really actually too much interesting going on, was there really with the news? Um, Speculation here and there, a few fight announcements here and there, but it wasn't enough to kind of make content on a consistent basis. So I just decided to kind of take the 3 weeks off. But there's also been some tech issues which I'm fucking still trying to get around, but I'm gonna try and make it work. And we're gonna get into last 3 weeks of boxing here because I do want to cover everything, and it's kind of accumulated over the last few weeks, and I feel like I can get a pretty chunky video out. It's been a while since I've put out a big video. I haven't really put out a big video that's kind of gone over, you know, that's been like half an hour, for example. You know, I think the last video I did that was semi big was probably the Zuffa documentary, right? Which when I all videos like that, this isn't quite a video. This isn't a video quite like that, but it should be a pretty chunky video, pretty good watch. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, let's get into it, man. All right, so first thing on the agenda is Alexander Usyk versus Rico Van Hooven. Alexander Usyk won by an 11th round TKO, and yeah, I have actually covered this fight kind of. I did a post fight reaction live stream, which was the last bit of content I did put out. Um, I didn't cover the fight in the um in the build up, mainly because I just didn't see it as a worthy fight. I thought it was a gimmick, and I don't want to cover those fights. I don't want to bring light to those fights anymore. I did Fury and Ngannou and Joshua and Ngannou, but after Joshua kind of laid out Ngannou, I was kind of done with it, and that's why I didn't cover it. I covered the fight announcement. I gave my thoughts on it. Um, I think I went even into further thoughts in a video about Usyk, um, saying what his next three opponents would be, Rico being one of them, and that's about all I did. A prediction, in my opinion, would have been, you know, pointless. Um, but ultimately, um, we were met with a very, very controversial fight indeed, and I don't just mean in the fact that it was a boxer versus a kickboxer, elite boxer and a kickboxer stepping in and getting a world title shot in his second fight. I mean, in the way in which it played out was highly controversial. Now, leading into this fight, of course, I didn't cover it in the traditional sense where I do a prediction. Um, I just kind of um, reacted to the fight announcement. And I'm not sure if I said it in the video, but it's something I have said. Um, I said Rico would surprise a few people that he can box a little bit. He's not like a Francis Ngannou who was seen as no chance against Tyson Fury because he's not a boxer. He's an MMA guy. Rico Van Hooven is a striker. An elite level kickboxer. It's a little bit easier to kind of change your skill set over, convert a few things over from kickboxing as opposed to MMA. MMA, there's just so many more variables. It's harder to come over. Whereas kickboxing is, a striking sport. Boxing is a striking sport. You can make it work. We've seen many successful kickboxers transfer over to boxing. Troy Miller, Dillian White, Vitaly Klitschko, Chris Algieri, someone who you know, didn't reach the heights of some of those other guys, but still, it is a thing that happens. Tenzin Nakakawa as well, who is a very good fighter, only lost to No Inoue's brother Takuma Inoue. Yeah, very good fighter, just beat Estrada, I believe. So we've seen many successful kickboxers come over to boxing and do well, but those were all different circumstances. They were all younger guys who, you know, hadn't had an entire fucking like career in kickboxing. Rico Van Hooven had an entire career in kickboxing, and I mean an entire career. This guy um literally was a world champion for 10 years. His career didn't span 10 years. He was a world champion in Glory for 10 years. Glory, for those who don't know, is the absolute elite level of kickboxing. It is a very, very hard promotion to compete in. We've seen the likes of Israel Adesanya, who was a very successful kickboxer. Of course, UFC middleweight champion, try to compete in Glory, never won a title there. It is the elite of the elite at that top level. Um, we've seen Jarrell Miller compete there. with to mix results. You know, so there's multiple examples I've just listed of guys who um, come over from different sports and tried. You know, Terrell Miller just said. Um, but Rico is the absolute pinnacle. You know, a lot of people were saying it. Usyk is Usyk, of course, and Rico Van Hooven is, you know, the Usyk of kickboxing. He's more like a Joe Lewis in the type of dominance he has displayed. But getting into the fight itself, out of the context, I am shocked, stunned, and appalled is the only fucking words I can use to describe my reaction to watching this fight. It was an incredibly baffling watch, and I'm stuck in between two minds of what's going on with Alexander Usyk at the minute. Coming into this fight, I thought he'd get it done very easily due to the fact he isn't a Tyson Fury. He won't undertrain, he won't underprepare, he won't underestimate anyone, um, in my belief, right? Whereas Tyson Fury would. We've seen it on multiple occasions, you know, that's why he's such an up and down fighter. Alexander Usyk is the pinnacle of consistency. Now, red flags really should have went up when he weighed in a little bit heavier. Um, he didn't look in bad shape. He did look a little bit fleshier, you know, a little bit heavier. But if I had to say what's going on with Usyk, it's either he shot or he didn't train. I think it's a bit of both, right? Because his focus recently has been very diverted. You know, he's been focusing a lot on Anthony Joshua. Um, and naturally, the drive to compete and train at the same level is going to go down. But if that's the case, I don't think he would have looked as shit as he did in the early rounds because he looked absolutely awful in the first round, couple of rounds. You know, if Alexander used the constant movement, you know, and there was none of that. He was flat on his feet. You know, he wasn't really using the pre slips. He wasn't being tricky with that lead hand at all. This is all stuff I thought would give, like, he'd put a beating on Rico for this stuff, you know, because it baffles top level boxers, right? Let alone a kickboxer. This is a second professional fight, you know. This is shit you don't see. Um, it's absolutely elite level stuff, and none of it was there from Alexander Usyk. And you know, if he was just undertrained, he would have looked good a little bit early and slowed down late. Now, Usyk is never typically an early rounds kind of guy, but he never looks like that in early rounds. You know, he never looks that lethargic in early rounds. You know, he always looks sharp, even if he, you know, does his better work in the later rounds, which was the case in this fight. You know, Rico Van Hooven kind of came in with one of the more awkward styles you'll ever see. It was kind of Joe Frazier esque in the way he was obviously a come forward fighter, and he was kind of constantly twitching, jittering. You know, very hard to get his reads on. Um, if I had to kind of break down Rico now, I'm going to get into this in more detail. If he books another boxing match, I'm going to do a proper breakdown. But if I had to go into more detail, you know, it was kind of a very hunched kind of stance. You know, he kept a very high guard. He kind of always kept his head moving, always kept his hands moving. Um, was just incredibly awkward from that perspective. His stance was just a very awkward thing to deal with, very hard to read. Um, he did put together one of the best game plans I've ever seen against Alexander Usyk, and something I've been saying for people to do for years. You know, you've got to come forward, you've got to be fearless, you've got to push him into the ropes. When you get him on that ropes, you've got to unload to the body. You know, you just got to use your size and your strength, and that's exactly what Rico Van Hooven did. He did it in some really, really clever ways. You know, him and Usyk could be in the center of the ring. Rico would occupy Usyk's guard with his lead hand. You know, he'd be kind of throwing some probing jabs out there while stepping forward, backing up Alexander Usyk. And once he got Usyk on the ropes, he'd kind of maybe hold, get on the inside, dig down to the body. It was tremendous stuff. It really was an excellent game plan. But come round 11, Usyk was in rounds previous kind of trying to get himself a little bit sharper, trying to get on his toes, trying to get, you know, that movement going. And to Alexander Usyk's credit, you know, I just mentioned how Rico was coming forward. He did that. He was in a sequence where he was doing that, you know, but his chin was exposed a lot of the time. Rico, he was kind of leaning over his front foot, um, him just making himself a closer target to Alexander Usyk, and Usyk caught him with a lead uppercut, sent Rico down very, very heavy, kind of head fell through the ropes, but he did stand up. He had missed his mouthpiece. There was about 20 seconds where they got the mouthpiece put back in, and then action resumed. Usyk kind of came in with, a flurry of shots. None of them landed particularly clean, and the referee called it about 2 seconds after the fight. Now, I think it was a very, very bad stoppage, and I think Rico is really hard done by, and I felt really bad for him. But that's one perspective. I also feel kind of bad for Usyk because he was probably going to stop Rico and probably do it definitively, right? And he didn't get the chance to do it definitively. He's going to get stick for that. But at the end of the day, what happened happened, and man, this was as a really like a proper Alexander Usyk fanboy. Obviously, I can still talk about him in an unbiased sense, like I just have had. Um, this was not the Usyk I have studied over the years. This is not the Usyk I know. Um, this that didn't look like the same man. That looked like he's definitely on the decline, and he fucking skyrocketed down my pound for pound list. Back to the number 6 spot. I'm not even joking. That's probably very controversial, but that's just what I saw. And then I did not see the pound for pound best in the world in that fight. I saw a man who just struggled. Like he just didn't look himself. All credit to Rico. I don't know how he gets on. It's hard to tell. He wasn't in there against um any sort of decent version of Usyk, but I wish him all the best. Hopefully, he does make a bit of a run in the heavyweight division, but it's hard to see, man, because I know he did well against Usyk, but we've seen this story before with Ngannou. I'm not sold yet. He looked better than I thought Ngannou looked, but not sold yet. But yeah, man, let's get into a few of the undercard bouts. We had Frank Sanchez versus Richard Torres Jr. Now, this fight for me was about as much as a sure thing as it could have been. I thought Frank Sanchez was leagues better than Richard Torres Jr. But of course, coming in, we didn't know where Frank Sanchez is in his career, and we still kind of don't. But I thought that Frank Sanchez with any sort of form would be leagues better than Richard Torres Jr. I think Richard Torres Jr. is a decent fighter, but I don't rate him particularly high. I think he's chinny. I just saw it in the amateurs. I don't think he's got a great chin for heavyweight, and with his kung fu aggressive style, it didn't suit well for the counter punching of Frank Sanchez, and that's what happened in round 2. Richard Torres Jr. was laid out cold. He did get back to his feet and immediately fell back over. Yeah, it was pretty devastating. Good to see Frank Sanchez elevate himself to a mandatory position in the division. Nobody wanted to fight him going into this. This fight was offered to about 6 people, including the likes of Moses Atama, and they all turned it down. Fair play to Richard Torres Jr. for taking it, but I don't see any big fights on the horizon for Frank Sanchez, but hopefully he can get a few more good wins in the bank. Now, moving on, we also had Jack Catterall versus Shakran Gurasov. I was surprised at who was favoured to win this. Gurasov was favoured to win this pretty, not widely, but it was, consensus that Gurasov would probably have the better Catterall. I saw it as Jack Catterall is very, 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 very underrated still. He is hitting his prime. And Gurasov is unproven. Catterall is very proven. He's beaten Echo Esserman, who's a good British level fighter, did a job on him. Beat Harlem Eubank, who's a good British level fighter. Beat Regis Prograis, who wasn't a complete shell of himself, but not great. Had a close fight final, Barboza Jr., did lose that. The only convincing loss of Jack Carroll's career. Beat Josh Taylor, who did definitely have a bit left in the tank towards the end of his career, but only for about 6 rounds. Of course, lost to Josh Taylor. but he did not fucking lose that fight. And yeah, he looked, I really think he's hitting his prime now. Jack Carroll in the past has always been awkward, but he's always been very, very negative, very afraid to kind of sit down on his shots and um, really stamp his authority. In this fight, we saw all the awkwardness we usually see from Jack Carroll, but with some spitefulness. I really felt like he probably could have stopped gears off if he upped the gears a bit more. But the thing with Carroll is that he's upped the gears more than he has in the past, and it's good enough. He dropped gears so very heavy in round one. I really think Jack Carroll's hitting his prime with his last two performances over Esserman, that demolition job, and this clinical display against Giasov. I think he's hitting his best. I think he's a world-class fighter. I think he's a fucking nightmare for a lot of guys in that welterweight division. And it's good to see as a Jack Carroll fan. Moving on, another fight on the card, Hamza Shiraz versus Alan Bekic. What the fuck do I even say? It was a complete and utter demolition job. This was one of the most... Bekic was one of the worst world title challenges I've ever seen. He fought proper journeyman style in there. It was looking to survive, shell up, and move. And Shiraz did what he needed to do and just walked him down and just battered him. Yeah, there's nothing I can say about it, really. Moving on, one more fight on the card. Daniel Lapin versus Benjamin Mendes-Tani. Now, this was a big upset. This was the start of the card. This was wow, man. This was fucked up. Actually, it was kind of fucked up. Daniel Lapin coming into this fight was 13-0. Benjamin Mendes-Tani was 9-1. Lapin is a fairly highly touted prospect. His stock definitely went down after that Lewis Edmondson fight. A lot of people thought he was lucky to win that. I thought he was lucky to win that, and I rated him fairly highly going into that fight. I think he's an awkward puzzle for anyone to solve in the light heavyweight division. He's long, he's rangy, he's a good boxer. But cracks were starting to show, and they were exploited by Benjamin and Mendes-Tani in there. He just seems to not have anything on the inside for anyone, which makes sense because he is such a long rangey guy. Maybe he doesn't have the biomechanics to fight on the inside, but there is literally no inside game there. There seems to be no resolve to dig into. In this, I thought he quit. I thought what ultimately put him down and it was the shot that stopped him. I really didn't think he was in all too much trouble there. I think it was a good stoppage, of course, but I feel like he voluntarily chose to be finished, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think when the going gets tough, he struggles. I think he's got no inside game. And even at long range, he's not particularly spiteful. And Benjamin Mendes-Tani came in with a fucking great game plan, where it was kind of that it was almost like a more, it was like a Subaru Matias if he was a bit more, kept his base a bit better and punched more correctly, just kind of walked him down, to really put it on him, and then didn't give Lapin any chance to breathe. And it was a very impressive performance, at least in my opinion, and good to see. Really was good to see. A big upset on the card, and definitely set the tone for team music that night because what a fucking nightmare of a night it was for him. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that whole fucking thing between them lot that night. Interesting night of boxing for sure. Good night of boxing, actually. The fight between Rico and Usyk was actually very entertaining. So we'll see what's next for both men. Usyk's got Caballero. If he shows up like he did in that fucking Rico fight against Caballero, he gets beat. He does get beat. Because Caballero would be a nightmare for that version of Usyk. That version of Usyk was not useless because he did get the job done. He did land a very good punch, but wasn't the elite fighter. Like, it was such a drastic drop off from the elite fucking level talent we're all used to seeing. But yeah, man, I spent about 18.5 minutes on just this alone. So we're going to move on now. Right, moving on. We had Dmitry Bivol versus Michael Eifert. Dmitry Bivol, of course, the excellent unified light heavyweight champion of the world, former undisputed. Only former undisputed due to mandatory obligations that he did not fulfill. It's the only reason he was stripped. Um, yeah, entered this fight with a record of 24-1 against Michael Eifert, who was an interesting mandatory challenger, I believe by the IBF. You know, he came into this fight with a record of 13-1, I want to say. I think that was his record. Yeah, this was a mismatch, but to be fair, most guys against Dimitri Bivol are a mismatch. Coming into this fight, I thought Bivol wouldn't have lost a step. He didn't lose a step. It was a concern, but I didn't think he would. He's a disciplined fighter in terms of how he lives his life, I believe. So a surgery, yeah, it could be problematic, but you know, I didn't think it'd be too bad. I didn't think he'd be aged out, certainly. And he looked very good. Michael Eifert, I actually kind of saw as a bit of a. First of all, he'd been mandatory for a very long time. Um, Horribly inactive. You know, the best guy he fought, the most recognizable, the only recognizable name on his record was Jean Pascal, right? Who's been about fucking ever. But yeah, that was the most recognizable name on his record. And yeah, I kind of saw him as a bit of a B-Tech Bivol, if I had to describe him stylistically at all. Not a big puncher, you know, just kind of likes to box at range, you know, keep behind a jab. He's nothing special. Dimitri Bivol did a job on him, like we said. You know, he went 12 rounds. He kind of went for it in the last 2 rounds, did Bivol. He probably could have done more. Well, he definitely could have done more. But it was good enough, you know what I mean? It was an excellent display of boxing from Dimitri Bivol, as usual. You know, he is fucking excellent. Like, I'm a huge Dimitri Bivol fan. I think he is fucking poetry in motion. Like, if that makes sense. He's absolutely incredible to watch, you know, with that pendulum step, with the distance management, you know, how he just measures you behind a jab, the variation with the jab, you know, how he switches up the tempo. He is just fucking excellent, right? In every aspect of boxing, in that kind of technical sense. And yeah, this is a typical Dimitri Bivol performance. He did drop Michael Eifert in the first round, with a kind of a step back left hook, kind of I wouldn't call it a check left hook, but a kind of step back left hook. Excellent, like just like the distance management, the time hits, mate. Don't even like he's so good. It's not even fucking funny, but yeah, it was typical Dimitri Bivol performance. Kept him at the end of the jab. Eifert couldn't do anything, couldn't really close the gap. Dimitri put it on him in the last 2 rounds. Tried to get him out of there. Didn't up the gears as much as you would like, but you know it was better than usual. But I've really never had a problem with Bivol not going through the gears and trying to get a finish. I know a lot of people were here to see finishes in boxing, and knockouts, but honestly, I fucking just love watching him fight. If he wins and doesn't get in trouble, it's a good performance from me. It's all the same as a knockout. In other than maybe the entertainment perspective, but you know, he wins definitively, whether he's knocking you out or not. He can definitely punch a little bit harder than his record indicates, or you know, than his recent fights indicate. But he's yeah, he's a talent, Dimitri Bivol. We all know this. Let's get the trilogy on with him and Beterbiev, please. I covered their first 2 fights. I believe my prediction for their second fight has been taken down, which is fucking great. Didn't know that until about 5 minutes ago, but yeah, man, that's a little bit, that sucks, but all the other videos are up surrounding the fight. Yeah, but let's get the trilogy on. I don't know how much Beterbiev is going to have left. You know, he's like 41, nearly 42, but you know, he is superhuman, Beterbiev, and I think Bivol's got the win in the trilogy. I think he's bridged that gap. I think Beterbiev's too old to do it, and I think Bivol's only going to get, you know, more familiar with Beterbiev. But fuck it, man. Let's see it again, please. Let's see it again. Um, who doesn't want to see that again? They're 1-1. Why not? Let's get it on. That's kind of all I had to say about this fight card, though. I did watch the undercard, but nothing too interesting, if I'm being completely honest with you. Few good fighters on there. Shout out to them. But that's all I've got to say, man. This was a mismatch, you know, like Usyk versus Rico, except this went the way it was supposed to go and didn't have an all too interesting undercard. So it's not all too much for me to speak about, but good performance from Richie Bivol. Either him versus, you know, I know him versus Callum Smith has been ordered, but that's a fucking mismatch. Callum Smith is an inside fighter. He won't be able to close distance. He hasn't got the foot speed. Gets absolutely out, just gets out of the box completely, gets taken apart. Um, Him versus Benavidez is great. Bivol versus Benavidez is a fight I really want to see, but let's get Beterbiev out of the way. He's earned his trilogy. You know, let's get that on. That needs to happen. So yeah, let's move on. All right. Let's talk about Lerone Richards versus Albert Ramirez now. This was a fight I wouldn't really talk about. I definitely wouldn't give it a prediction, possibly give it a post-fight review. But it's not a fight I'd really talk about outside of a video like this or outside of what happened in the fight, the controversy with the decision. Now, Lauren Richards coming into this fight is a good fighter, you know, has kind of been in no man's land for a little bit, you know. Um, he was with Eddie Hearn at one point. I believe they had a disagreement. I think that's what happened. He was only with Eddie Hearn for 3 fights, I think. Um, I think he was on the Parker Chisora 2 card. But yeah, he was with Eddie Hearn. He left Eddie Hearn. He lost to Steve Woodhall, which really set him back. He's only had one win since then, but came in against Albert Ramirez, who I believe was WBA interim light heavyweight champion, and in my opinion, completely outboxed him like 10-2. It was a terrible fight, but he completely outboxed him, in my opinion. And didn't get the decision, man. Which is unfortunate for Lauren Richards, who, like I said, has been in no man's land for 2 years now, something like that. You know, you haven't really heard much from Lauren Richards, have you? So this was just one of them fucking fights. You knew it was going to happen. Really, you could kind of tell. It kind of felt like just one of them. Lauren Richards is a frustrating fighter in many ways. He's a very good boxer, but in a similar way to Dimitri Bivol, doesn't go through the gears. But Bivol, like, isn't like Bivol's just really good, and that's the reason his fights he doesn't need to go through the gears, right? Because he's so defensively good, he's just so complete in all areas that he can win. It is entertaining I think to watch Dimitri Bivol box, because he is trying, like he's winning, but he's not taking those kind of precautions to not get hit that a lot of these more negative guys take. He's just very good defensively. So he's able to be offensive without necessarily going for a knockout, but still being mindful of his defense. Whereas a guy like Lauren Richards seems to sacrifice his offense for his defense, and therefore is a very negative fighter. Like I said, doesn't go through the gears. And, you know, maybe that's what's lost in this fight against Albert Ramirez. But Ramirez really couldn't lay a glove on him, and he got completely outboxed. So it's one of them things where it's like, yes, Lauren Richards could definitely do more, but he did enough here, right? And it is a problem with him stylistically. He really should just focus on, you know, his offense and, you know, work on the. You can blend both. Like Dimitri Bivol's a perfect example. It is hard to explain, but Dimitri Bivol's fights are still compelling, even though they go to decision. You know, because he's always leading with a jab. You know, he's bringing shots behind it, but he's got this excellent defense. You know, you need a mix of both in this sport. Otherwise, shit's not going to go your way. And Lauren Richards needs to work on that, man, because that was a disgraceful decision, but he could have done more. And Ideally, you should never leave it in the judge's hands unless you are Dimitri Bivol, because a guy like Dimitri Bivol, because he's just not. He separates the gap so wide. Do you know what I mean? Whereas a guy like Lauren Richards, yes, he outboxed Albert Ramirez very, very clearly, but doesn't particularly let his hands go, you know? And he's very negative. So you're kind of getting this fight where he's outboxing him, sure. Ramirez isn't really landing on him, sure. But there's these long gaps of just inactivity where nothing's going on. Whereas Dimitri Bivol, there's always something going on. Right? He's always, you know, measuring you with the jab and, you know, tagging you with a jab and then bringing shots like, behind it and then stepping back out. Like there's always something going on where a guy like Lauren Richards will, yeah, he'll land a double jab. Then there's nothing, there's absolutely nothing from him. He'll be very negative for 30 seconds. You know, you need to fucking find the balance, man. You know, Shakur Stevenson's another one who does it exceptionally well. You know, it can be done, but it only really seems like if you can do it, you're elite. And Lauren Richards isn't elite. He's a good fighter, but he's not elite. Obviously, um, I feel bad for him, but ultimately, you've got to sometimes take it out of judges' hands. And a guy like Dimitri Bivol and Shakur Stevenson, yes, they don't take it out of judges' hands in the traditional sense, but they make it so abundantly clear that they are the better man in there, right? By completely outboxing their opponent, making the gap so wide, you can't rob them. You can't rob them. You know, it doesn't really happen. I know people say Bivol and Bertabayev won. That was a fucking close fight. Get a grip of yourself. It's fucking close. You know, Bivol might have won. It's not a robbery, though. It's not a robbery. It was a close fight. It was very, very competitive. Get a fucking grip. It wasn't a fucking robbery in any sense of the word. Robbery is when it is very, very. This was a robbery, right? Lauren Richards, Albert Ramirez was a robbery, but I'm all for fair criticism, and he could have done more. Um, yeah, you got to find that fine line. You know, you got to separate yourself. You got to do more. But that's all I got to say about that. I didn't watch the undercard. I didn't even really watch the fight until the next day. But yeah, man. Feel bad for Lauren Richards, but you know, I'm so fucking desensitized to seeing these types of decisions in boxing at this point. So yeah, moving on. Right, moving on to a fight announcement now, and one I'm fucking so excited to talk about. Katie Taylor announces her retirement fight. It is at Croke Park, which is fucking amazing. It will be against Flora Philly, I believe. I've never heard of the girl. No offense. I'm not a big women's boxing guy. Gonna be completely honest with you. I don't think I've ever covered a woman's fucking fight on this channel. Um, I don't think I ever have. But yeah, um, this was announced, of course. Katie Taylor is the star of the show. Never heard of this filly. Oh, Pilly, I don't know what her name is, but I'm going to assume she's all right. But I didn't expect for there to be, for Katie Taylor's retirement fight to be, you know, something like a Chantel Cameron Free, for example, or a Sandy Ryan, something like that. I didn't expect any of that. I expected this, something like this, you know, because she's finally getting her fight at Croke Park. You know, if you don't know, it's been a big thing for a while now to get her to fight at Croke Park. You know, and she finally got it. You know, I did think she'd get it. I did think this would be the moment she'd get it. You know, she's probably the greatest Irish athlete ever. She's definitely the greatest Irish boxer ever. You know, she's probably the greatest female boxer ever. And this fight's great. To see it at Croke Park is amazing. Like, it really, really is. You know, many of you don't know, but my mum's side of the family is Irish. So you know, my mum is Irish, so I have a lot of Irish DNA in me, so it means quite a lot to me. You know, it's quite and most of my family's Irish, so this is sick. It really is. This is amazing. And hopefully she gets it done. Katie Taylor. Can't imagine she won't, you know. Can't imagine she won't get it done, but you never know. She is old now, is Katie. You know, she's what's she, 39? That is old. But you know, she's looked very, very good. As of late. You know what I think? You know, she had the first Chantel Cameron fight. Yeah, she lost it. Cool. She had the second Chantel Cameron fight. Controversial. Controversial. I thought she won it in the moment, but I haven't rewatched it since. It was controversial. She had the Serrano rematch, also controversial. I thought she won it, but controversial. And she had the third fight against Serrano, which honestly was a weird one. I thought Serrano got the game plan completely wrong. That was the clearest victory Katie had over her. So that's always weird to see, but um, yeah. Um, I'm sure she would look good. It's kind of hard to tell, but I'm sure she'll look good in a retirement fight at Croke Park. You never know. Sometimes people get these big stadium fights and they want it for a long time and they choke. You know, it's the pressure of the moment, but hopefully not, because we all want to see Katie Taylor win a retirement fight, especially at Croke Park. You know, it'd be tremendous. So let's see that. Let's see it. I'm all here for it. I'm really excited. If you can't tell, um, but yeah, thank you for what. I was going to say thank you for watching. Goodbye, but I've still got more to go. Um, yeah, moving on. Sorry. Right, another fight announcement. A very good fight announcement. I can give a bit more thought to here. It is Lamont Roach versus William Zepeda. I believe this is for the vacant WBC lightweight title. Of course, vacated by Shakur Stevenson. Excellent fight. Really is. You've got I'd classify it as counterpunching style of Lamont Roach versus the high volume of William Zepeda. You know, very good fighter is the pair of these two. You know, Lamont Roach is a guy who I wouldn't say I've given shit. I haven't given shit at all. I did think his fight with Tank Davis was a complete and utter fucking joke leading into it. I still do think it was a joke leading into it. Just because he did very, very well and should have won doesn't mean it makes it any less of a joke, in my opinion. It was a joke that he cherry picked Lamont Roach, you know, bringing the guy up from the division below when you've got all these guys who you can fight in your division who you won't fight. It was a joke bringing up a super featherweight, but in all that's no shade to Lamont Roach, but in all fairness to Lamont Roach, he looked fucking excellent in that Tank Davis fight. And should have got the win. Should have got the win without the knockdown that should have been scored. He should have got the win. And he of course didn't, but like that's one thing. The Isaac Cruz fight after is another fight at 41. He also got a draw there. So Lamont Roach is coming off 2 draws. He's got 3 career draws. Zepeda, from my knowledge, is still coming off the Shakur Stevenson defeat, where it was a valiant effort, but he was completely outclassed. It just wasn't on the level of Shakur, unfortunately. Which, you know, sucks for him. Put in a good effort, but was completely outboxed. Coming into this fight with Lamont Roach, imagine if there's another draw, for one. That's the first thing that jumped to my mind, is what if Lamont Roach gets 3 draws in a row? I kind of want to see it because it'd be fucking funny. But he's getting another world title shot. He deserves it. This is a fairly 50-50 fight because Zepeda was completely outboxed and not toyed with, but completely outboxed by Shakur Stevenson, who is, of course, the best defensive fighter in the planet, probably one of the better counterpunchers on the planet. You know, looked excellent in that fight. Lamont Roach shares some stylistic similarities to Shakur. He's a good counterpuncher. He's not quite the elite defensive fighter that Shakur is. He's very, very good. I think Lamont Roach is going to get this done. You know, we saw William Zepeda struggle with Tevin Farmer, who is one of those kind of slick outside American boxers. We've seen Zepeda struggle with this style multiple times, or styles that are similar, right? I think Lamont Roach gets it done in a pretty competitive fight. You know, all of Zepeda's fights are going to look competitive because he's so high volume. To be fair, like a lot of people thought, you know, he made that Shakur fight close. Open your fucking eyes when you're watching a boxing match, please. Please, there's no like he barely landed a clean glove on him. He landed like 2 clean punches in the entire fucking fight. Like, get a fucking grip. Um, it wasn't close. He was hitting all like Philly shell the entire night, but people will, will say what they say. He didn't do. He put in a good effort against Shakur, but he didn't win many rounds. He won about 2 rounds, maybe. So, it's what I with Lamont Roach hasn't been lucky recently, and yeah, I hope he wins his this world title, becomes 2 division champion, I believe. I think this is the weight class for him. I didn't totally love the move up to super lightweight. It was good. It was against Isaac Cruz, who's a smaller person for that division. I didn't love that move though. I'm glad he's come back down to lightweight. I think this probably is the division for him. Ideally, super featherweight, but this is the division for him, in my opinion. This is a great fight. I am really looking forward to it. I think this will be entertaining. I think it'll be an interesting watch. And I favour Lamont Roach to get it done. But with Cepeda making it sticky in moments, with that high volume, that's always going to be hard to deal with for anybody who's not elite, I'd say. World class fighters will struggle with it. You've got this world class pressure fighter who outputs constant volume, and it is constant. His work rate is fucking insane. It's probably the best in the sport. Is William Zepeda's. Of course, maybe once again, it is sticky because Lamont Roach's form is weird, and there are intangibles like there is in every fight. Like the fact Lamont Roach, Zepeda's the type of guy you want to be sharp with, right? You don't want to have an even slightly off night because where he's just throwing constant punches. You don't want to feel just slightly sluggish, because that can really throw you off. You don't want to give Zepeda them opportunities, but my prediction without factoring that kind of shit in is Lamont Roach fairly clearly, but competitively. Great fight. Really a great fight. Let's move on. Right, another fight announcement. Callum Walsh versus Tyler Denny. Now, this was a bit random. I didn't expect this fight next, but I'm completely okay with it. Of course, Callum Walsh is Zuffa's poster boy, I guess. I guess he's Zuffa's poster boy, if I had to call him anything notable. And Tyler Denny is a very good British level fighter. Not a big puncher, but very tricky. Is he coming off a loss? Yeah, he is. George Lillard, which isn't a bad loss at all. Yeah, this is an interesting fight. You've got the I think both men are. I think Tyler Denny's British level. Callum Walsh. It's hard to tell. European level operator, maybe. At this point, at least. Developing talent, of course. In his recent fights, hasn't looked like a particularly big puncher, as opposed to earlier in his career. But he is a southpaw. He is long. He is rangy. He does use that very, very well. Tyler Denny is the type of guy who isn't the biggest puncher in the world, but likes to get his head in your chest, likes to output high volume, likes to put it on you, which I think can give Callum Walsh quite a bit of trouble. I do favour Callum Walsh to win, but I think he'll outbox him in the early to mid rounds really, really convincingly, really, really well. And I think Tyler Denny will come on late. I think he'll be working the body in moments, mid to early. That will kind of sap a bit of energy out of Walsh whenever he can. And I think late, Tyler Denny will really, really come on in this fight. And I think it will give Callum Walsh a bit of trouble. When the legs kind of slow down, when he's not able to, keep him behind a jab as often. It is a fairly simple fight for Walsh. Keep him behind a jab, occupy him with the jab, walk him onto a few straight left hands, using that outside foot positioning. um, being the southpaw, um, tag like not dig down to the body, but tag the body with kind of jabs at the body as Denny comes forward. Take the air out of him. Do that for straight left hand as well, and just keep moving laterally. That's a pretty simple game plan, but it is easier said than done. It is the type of game plan where it is going to be very um, demanding, which favors Tyler Denny late. But if Tyler Denny was a big puncher, I'd maybe favor him winning by a late stoppage. But he's not a big puncher. I think Callum Wolf gets it done in a fight which will, be a bit sticky late, but he'll get through it. He'll look good early, but we'll maybe get some stick for the performance overall, which, it's a good fight, though. It is a good fight, I've been covering Zuffa pretty not as heavily recently, but, I did the documentary, which really went in depth on every card up until the Opetaya versus Glanton card. It is. I do kind of plan on doing another one a few events down the line. How many? I don't know. It was always kind of been the plan to follow up that video in a few months to a year, but I don't know. I have been enjoying the Zuffa events, which I'll get into next. But I planned to do a Lomachenko video documentary. I did the resume video, of course, but I have come to be very disappointed in it. Was planning for months to do a proper in-depth one, which was going to be a few hours long. It was going to be well produced. It was going to be huge. Like this has genuinely been in the works for at least 5 months. Announced 4 months ago. But that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen now with Lomachenko coming out of retirement. So I do need a big project. But the Zuffa things are kind of mini documentaries. The Lomachenko one was going to be big. But unfortunately, he's come out of well, I say unfortunately, I'm glad to see him back, I guess. But he's come out of retirement. I could still do it, but I wanted it to be a complete summary of all he did in the sport. But that's going to have to wait a while. So yeah, I do intend to follow up with Zuffa video. It'll probably happen. Either way, I'm going to cover the events, but those kind of big rounded up mini documentaries. I will probably do another. But yeah, moving on. Let's move on. All right, yesterday. Well, I don't know if it's yesterday for you guys, but whenever this goes up, Saturday, whenever. We had Zuffa Boxing 7, which was Chris Billam-Smith versus the fucking Ryan Rosinski. That was the name, Ryan Rosinski, which ended up being a tremendous fight and a pretty good card. I enjoyed it. I believe the consensus is most people enjoyed it. The main event was spectacular. It was really, really good. Chris Billam-Smith coming into this fight, former world champion, defended his title twice, beat Lawrence Okoli, defended the belts against Mastinek and Rich Riakporhe. Lawrence Okoli being frustrating, boring, but a good champion, good fighter overall. Mastinek being, yes, on the older side, but was a European champion after that fight, is still in okay form. Coming off a loss to Vidal Riley, sure, but was still very good at the time. And Richard Riakporhe, who is now British heavyweight champion, moved up, kind of got to the world level at cruiserweight. Obviously didn't win his world title, looked awful, but for all being said, he had a very solid title run to Chris Billam-Smith, which all came to an end at the hands of Sergio Ramirez. It was unfortunate. He got completely outboxed. The movement of Ramirez gave CBS a lot of trouble. But yeah, coming into this fight against Rosinski, who is very, very crude, for one. He's a very, very crude fighter. He comes forward, throws punches in bunches with a lot of intent behind them. I saw that, and with the zero defense, and I saw that as a complete and utter dream for Crispin Smith, who is a guy who, yes, can box a little bit, is very well schooled, but can kind of doesn't mind a rough fight. Like he's a pretty, he likes to make fights rough. Crispin Smith, and that's exactly what we saw. Rosinski was doing the majority of the backing up of Billum Smith. Billum Smith spent a lot of the fight with his back on the ropes, but he was constantly tagging Rosinski moving in. Rosinski was getting tagged with the left hook specifically at absolute will. Got hurt a few times. Was having good success, yes. Was being very dirty, I will admit, using his head, putting the forearm in the neck of Crispin Smith, which the referee warned him about. He took a point off in fourth round, I think, for the head. But that's just the way he fights. He likes to rough you up. Does Rosinski. He showed a great chin. He showed a lot of heart. But like I said, you just can't. I think Crispin Smith likes that kind of fight. You got to do like a Zerda Ramirez against Crispin Smith. You got to keep it at range. You'll kind of always pivot off to the side, just not stay in front of him for too long. That's what Ramirez did. Rosinski just isn't well schooled enough for that. It was just a fight, and I thought Crispin Smith had him beaten a fight all day, and he did. Stopped him going into round 11 or going into round 12. I think it was going into round 11. Good win for Crispin Smith, and he's probably next for Jai Apataya, which is a great fight. I think he gets beat, but it's a great fight. Two big names. Can't wait to see it. In the co-main event, we had Jack Massey versus Chev Clark. Now, I thought this was an interesting one because Chev Clark lost to Mosquera for the European title, I believe, and then lost to Vidal Riley for the British, which was his belt at the time. Got a win, which I didn't think he looked particularly great in, and was booked in this fight against Jack Massey. Now, Jack Massey is a big cruiserweight. Is at a good level. Lost to Jay Apataya for the world title, showed incredible toughness, and there was absolutely no shame in, how that fight went. He showed a lot of heart, but just wasn't good enough. I didn't know who. I saw this as 50-50, and I slightly favoured Chev Clark, which I fucking nearly was so wrong. But ultimately wasn't. It was kind of very tricky for Chev Clark because Jack Massey is such a big, very dense cruiserweight, could easily be a heavyweight, has fought a heavyweight against Joseph Parker, who, is a very, very good heavyweight, of course. Chev Clark just struggled to close the range, close the distance. There was no head movement to try and get past the long levers of Jack Massey. There was no jabs to close, like I said, close the distance. And that's the two things you need. You can't just barrel your way in. Really need to get his head off the centre line, really need to jab to blind Massey to get his way in. But ultimately wasn't able to do that. Was kind of trying to barrel in at moments and got caught twice in round 4 very heavily. Could have been stopped, but got caught twice in round 4 very heavily. After that, actually started doing much better, landing the odd right hand against Jack Massey, before eventually putting him down in round 7, standing up. Jack Massey eventually stood up and got swarmed by Chev Clark and stopped. I thought this was tricky because Chev Clark, for one, I thought got up very, very quickly from the knockdowns, which is something Massey didn't do. Massey kind of bided his time, but ultimately, Massey's the one who got stopped. But this was a great fight. Good come from behind victory for Chev Clark. Good win in general. Maybe Chev Clark versus Brzezinski next. That sounds like a good little firefight, if I'm being honest with you. And yeah, hopefully, Shevchenko will pick up a few more good wins. You know, he's 35 now, been a British champion, 12-2 record now, beat Jack Massey. It's not bad. But yeah, uh, we had Lee Cutler versus Aaron Sutton. I actually missed a lot of Lee Cutler versus Aaron Sutton. Sorry, I said Cutter, I think. Um, yeah, I didn't really see much of this fight. It was over due to dislocated shoulder, which sucks for Sutton. Um, I haven't really got much to say. We also saw Steve McKenna versus Cassie Streeter. Um, Steve McKenna, always in a great fight. You know, just came out, just immediately got to work, got stuck in and stopped Streeter in round one. Yeah, McKenna's always in fun fights. His brother's fighting for a world title on the Callum Walsh undercard. All the best, all the best. It was a good performance. Not much to say as round one knockout. Sam Hickey versus Todd Tompkins was an excellent performance from Sam Hickey, who's a very, very good prospect. I like the finishing sequence, the way he kind of threw the punches, you know, on an angle which Tompkins just did not see coming. Nobody got put down very heavy, very, very heavy, but that is very good from Sam Hickey. This card was kind of like, it was almost like a boxer card, right? A lot of these guys are boxer talents. I believe Sam Hickey was with Boxer, McKenna was with Boxer, Cutler was with Boxer. You know, they actually fought each other on a Boxer show. Massey was with Boxer. Bill Smith was with Boxer. It was this is like a Boxer card, but match made much better than any Boxer card. You know, it clashed well stylistically. I felt so. Yeah. Not much more to say about that. It was a good card, probably the best super card so far. It was good to see them get out of the Apex, even though blatant lies from Dana White saying they sold 6,000 tickets. That arena holds 2.5 thousand people. So, yeah, that's funny. But, yeah, thank you for watching. And that's all I've really got to say in the last 3 weeks. Thank you for watching. I'm back to being consistent. And, yeah, goodbye.